and gender nonconforming and a bunch of other folks get rounded up and placed in SHU, right? Because it's considered more safer than the general population by the prison staff. And there's something called SHU syndrome, which is kind of, PTSD kind of diagnoses for people that have spent a lot of time in special housing units, right? And so I think that's one place to trace this. I mean, I think anyone who has done time in prison, right, is going to come out in having some sort of relationship to that, experience of like raw brutality, right? It's kind of like relentless force. But I think specifically thinking around the question of SHU, which is something that hopefully we're all organizing against currently, as a part of a larger abolitionist strategy, right? So it's not enough that we close down SHU. We need to do that as we're closing down all other facets of the prison-industrial complex. But I think thinking there is one place that we could start.
One of the really, it's not surprising, but like one of the statistics that like the prison system and the Bureau of Justice has produced, so like kind of like using like the system's own statistics against them, is that at least half of all people in women's prisons, at least half, have suffered prior physical and sexual abuse before their arrest and incarceration, often at the hands of loved ones and family members. So this means people are entering women's prisons already traumatized with PTSD from suffering abuse, at least half. And when you think about, people who have suffered abuse, if somebody comes up to you with a clipboard and you don't know who the hell they are, and they're like, it's associated with some study at, with the prison, you're not gonna barrel and tell them, wait, these are all the traumas I've suffered. Most of the time you're gonna be like, I'm not going to talk to you because that will go down on my record and somehow be used against me. So you can figure that there's probably a greater percentage than half, but at least half, were, said, yes, I have suffered past abuse. So people are going into women's prisons already traumatized, by past physical and sexual abuse. And then prison itself is traumatizing because you're told, at the very best, you're told like when to eat, when not to eat, when to go to sleep, you get locked in, all your movement is controlled. And then in women's prisons, you have male staff, and regardless of where the women are placed, so that like male staff members will be watching people like on the toilet as part of their job. They'll be watching them in the shower as part of their job. They'll be watching them like while they sleep, or they're getting dressed or undressed as part of their job. And this then re-traumatizes, people, because suddenly you don't have any privacy. Suddenly you're like seeing, flashbacks. And then there's also like the search procedure, which is like you get like pat-down searches, and oftentimes you get pat-down searches by somebody of the opposite gender, and this can re-traumatize somebody. There are strip searches, after visits or after you've like been moved to like say the hospital or something else. So there's all sorts of traumas that people experience in prison, even when this is traumatizing, even if you have never experienced any past abuse in your life. So like constantly go through this. It's not a one-time thing. It's like in every single time you like leave your cell or your housing unit, to go someplace, you experience all of these, like invasions of your body, So I'm not like an expert on like what constitutes PTSD and where the line is, but you can kind of imagine how many more people are traumatized just by having to go through that day after day.
I just add one thing to that, but there was this testimony given by a lot of people who have been in the juvenile justice system in Washington before the Washington State Supreme Court, and one of the youth who testified, who is currently in, I believe, or has been in really recently, was talking about how she asked her family to stop visiting her because she had to be strip searched every single time they visited her, and just, right, just how harmful is that going to be to her well-being overall? And a student in my class, we were talking about this in my class the other day, and a student said that she had recently read an article, which I haven't seen, that was about prisons in Afghanistan, and how one of the reasons, it was basically justifying that part of the reason the U.S. needs to stay in Afghanistan is because there's been this horrible process where women visiting prisoners in these prisons are strip searched, and how that's sexual abuse.